Welcome to a Monday edition of The Sweat. I'm your host, Jessie Coffield, and to ease the pain of this dreary, and for those of us on the East Coast, snowy Monday, the next hour will be dedicated to fantasy sports and betting. You're welcome. Football, basketball, and hockey are all on the menu tonight, so let's dig in with our NFL panel. DraftKings contributors Reed Fowler and Jeff Ulrich. It's everyone's favorite thing, Overreaction Monday, where we start jumping to conclusions from Sunday's results. Okay, the Ravens beat the 49ers, extending their win streak to 8, snapping the 49ers win streak. And after the Patriots lost to the Texans, they're in the driver's seat for home field throughout the playoffs. They're now favorites to win the AFC at plus 125. Reed, is it an overreaction to say that Baltimore will win out and make the Super Bowl?
I don't think it is. I think when you look at the team that they just beat in the 49ers, a strong NFC team, a lot of us thought that might be.
And we need a mic and a mic on.
Well, hey-o, there we go, we're back. It's back in the saddle. Surprise, there it is. There's a fail stamp. Thank you, Cody, in the back there. No, I was going to say, look, it's not a surprise at all. I mean, if you look at what happened on Sunday when they faced the 49ers, that's the Super Bowl preview that we potentially would want to see. And that game was really good back and forth. You know, it's a shame if we don't get to see that again. And if they win out, look, their schedule is not that hard. They have the Bills, Jets, Browns, and Steelers are their next 4 games, and it's feasible that they could run the table on that. And yes, 2 of those teams have given them trouble. The Steelers in that first matchup took them to overtime, and obviously the Browns have beat them at Baltimore. So yeah, you could potentially see these matchups presenting some sort of issue, but if they win out and they clearly have the tiebreaker against the Patriots and they have home field advantage in the AFC, who's going to beat this team? I mean, the only team that's going to beat them is themselves right now. Either if they get too high off of what they're doing, their success, and they don't keep it on the grindstone, or if they get just riddled with injuries. We don't hope those 2 things. You can't project those 2 things. So I don't think it's out of the question at all.
Jeff, is it an overreaction to say that Baltimore will win out and make the Super Bowl?
I think it's an overreaction. I mean, they're the betting favorite right now in the AFC, right? I mean, so if you're picking a team to do that, it's probably going to be the Baltimore Ravens. Makes the most sense. At the same time, I can't say that plus 125 for them to win the AFC right now is that enticing for me. And Reed kind of failed to mention the team that I like to come out of maybe not nowhere, but to kind of surprise me, and that's Kansas City. I mean, Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes has beaten Lamar Jackson twice. They're kind of flying a little bit under the radar here. I think people kind of forgot about them after the Mahomes injury, but they've just been kind of cruising along. They're still a really good team. I don't think the path is necessarily 100% clear for Baltimore that we should just start crowning them, and I certainly wouldn't bet them at those odds, but they're the betting favorite, and for good reason right now. They definitely have a path to get home field advantage. I think Reed's right, though. The Steelers present a bit of a tougher matchup than I think people realize. We'll see how they do against Buffalo. I think they will take care of Buffalo, quite frankly. I think Buffalo is still – they're a solid team, but I don't think they're quite on the level of, the Chiefs and the Ravens right now. But for me right now, I'm looking at the Chiefs as really good value for betting. I do think Baltimore is deserving of being the favorite, but I wouldn't go so far to crown them right yet.
Let's talk about what's going on in New England. The Patriots lost to the Texans mainly because their offense was so poor for most of the game. Jeff, is it an overreaction to say that Tom Brady is the problem in New England?
Yeah, I'd say that's a bit of an overreaction. Look, sure, his skills are diminishing. I get it. Like, I've looked at the stats as well. They're not good for Tom Brady this year. But, I mean, look, you still have a veteran quarterback who's won a billion Super Bowl rings here. I mean, he brings an element to this team, obviously, that isn't necessarily defined by measurables. And I know that's like the hoaxy way of saying, and it's the easy way out, but it's true. I mean, saying Tom Brady is the problem with this team right now is a little bit of a joke, in my opinion. So, yes, are the Patriots offense having trouble moving it? Absolutely. Has Tom Brady been in this spot before, actually each of the past 3 years? Absolutely. And then he came back and threw for 500 yards against the Eagles and beat the Rams last year in the Super Bowl. So I would not count this Patriots team out. I know I didn't exactly discuss them when I was talking about the AFC Championship race, but look, whoever's going to win, Kansas City, Baltimore, they're going to have to go through New England. Someone's going to have to beat this team still. I still think they're definitely at third place, and they still have an opportunity to perhaps even grab home field advantage if they get it turned around quick. I think you'll see them come up with something new going into the playoffs. I think Tom Brady is still an effective quarterback, especially when it gets cold weather in Foxborough. So yes, this one's definitely an overreaction by my standpoint.
Reed, Tom's the problem. Am I overreacting?
Yes. I don't think you're overreacting, though, to Jeff's whiteboard there. Nick Foles had a very, very precipitous downfall and zero chance in Jacksonville. But no, look, Tom's not the problem.
The Jacksonville thing did not go well for Emerson and I this year.
No, it did not, and it makes me smile from ear to ear. And look, with Tom Brady, Jeff makes, he talks about like people overreacting to Tom Brady, and this happens quite a bit, right? I mean, the bar of success for the Patriots is so high that a team that's 10-2 has issues going into the playoffs and moving forward. And look, anyone who watched that game, sure, they'll watch the last few games with the Patriots, that they don't have any offensive talent. They really have. Tom doesn't trust anyone. You saw the stuff of him talking on the sideline. You can rehash all of those things, and those things are valid. And when you look at this offense, it does scare you because you're so used to it. But let's remind people of last year too. Gronkowski was riddled with injuries last year, and yes, he was still someone that did get a lot of defense, transferred over to his way, but he wasn't the best of what he's been. And Chris Hogan was not even a thing last year. And so when you talk about the offense, the one part that really does worry me, or hasn't really shown his capabilities, is James White. That's really where I think the Patriots are failing to use. He's not a guy that you can put back there and put 15 attempts, rush attempts, and get him 10 targets. That's not exactly the James White game that we're used to. That's not how the Patriots want to run and use him specifically. So that, I will say, is something that I want to see the Patriots do a little bit better, because he hasn't been as much of a factor in these games as we have seen in the past, especially in 2018. It's really that part, and in terms of the free agency and the personnel that the Patriots failed to bring in sort of with the draft, Sony Michel, and then also in free agency this most recent year. That's the stuff that really is potentially parts that you can really say that that's not an overreaction, and that stuff has failed the Patriots, which is we're not used to seeing that year over year. These guys are so great in terms of personnel management. It's not Tom Brady's fault at all.
And let's not forget, too, the Patriots brought in Sanu. N'Keal Carey has had played like 2 games. Yeah. These guys could be hitting their stride week 17. So
exactly.
I would reserve judgment personally.
All right, I'll reserve judgment on Tom Brady.
Yeah, you better, Jesse.
All right, fine. Devante Parker had a career day for the Dolphins. 7 catches, 159 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Good for 37.9 fantasy points. Reed, is it an overreaction to say he should start getting wide receiver 1 consideration for your fantasy lineups?
Yeah, a little bit,
Okay.
but not very far off, because Devante Parker over the last 4 games has seen a total of 41 targets. He clearly is Ryan Fitzpatrick's number 1 person, and it really is a matter of, look, Miami has a terrible run game. They're dead last in the NFL in their run game. They obviously have a ton of injuries, not including the run game, with Kalen Ballage being hurt, which looks like a season-ending injury. Different people in the wide receiver core getting hurt. And so, yeah, Devante Parker has been that one guy, has been that safety blanket for Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he's producing. And this guy is absolutely producing. But we have seen the floor from Devante Parker. Now, we don't know just yet. And yes, this entire season, the last 4 games, proves that he's a guy that belongs in our lineups as a wide receiver too. We don't know yet if it's Devante Parker just playing extremely over his expectation, or if it was Adam Gase and just him not liking Devante Parker for whatever reason, because Devante Parker has always been a guy that's been considered on the trade block for Miami, a guy that's been considered dead to rights in this offense. Maybe he just needed some magic with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Maybe that's the case, but right now I'm going to temper expectations because we have seen that floor from him, but he's been playing fantastic, and their schedule moving forward is absolutely fantastic for receivers as well. So he's right on that borderline of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 for me.
Jeff, am I overreacting?
No, I don't think this one is an overreaction. Look, Devante Parker has been a bust his first 4 years in the league. There's no question. I mean, this was a player coming out of college people expected to perform. He was an absolute touchdown machine in college. He's a big body guy who was able to go up and challenge for balls when he was in college. He did not transfer that into the NFL for whatever reason. He's not good after the catch. He is doing that now, though. That is what he is doing. That is how these games are coming. He is actually doing what people projected that he was going to do when he came into the NFL. So the talent has been there for whatever reason. He just did not get it together his first few years in the league. This year he has. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that, in my opinion. And, the line against the Eagles is great. Reed's mentioned they have softer matchups. Miami is in a spot where they're going to be throwing late most games anyways. I absolutely think he's a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the year.
The Jaguars loss to the Buccaneers. Cover your ears, Jeff. Nick Foles was not good. 7 for 14 with an interception before being benched for Gardner Minshew. Jeff, Doug Marrone announced Monday that Gardner Minshew will be the team's starting quarterback for the last month of the season. Is the Nick Foles era in Jacksonville over before it even really began?
I mean, look, it appears so. And what do you do if you're Jacksonville? They brought in Doug Marrone for one more year, and that was probably the mistake. I mean, I'm not sure why they gave him one more year. They did. Absolutely nothing has changed. You can obviously see it's not exactly the quarterback play necessarily that's hurting this team. It's the fact they can't stop the run. Their offensive line can't stop their quarterback from getting hammered. So I'm sure Minshew might do a little bit better job. He's certainly more mobile in the pocket, which is probably what they need right now, considering how bad they are at protecting their quarterback. So it's not a good situation for a veteran quarterback like Nick Foles, who likes to hold on to the ball, look for that downfield, those big throws. I think that Jacksonville should be going with Gardner Minshew at this point. I think that they probably should just move on from Nick Foles, although a lot depends on what they're going to do next year. So right now, if you're asking my opinion what's going to happen, they probably will just move on from him. But like I said, I expect a coaching change at the end of the year, and a lot of things could change in Jacksonville in a hurry.
Reed, talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, what are you supposed to, the dumb part of it too was giving this guy a contract at $88 million, whatever it was, for 4 years. Because now you're stuck,
and
right?
not bringing in a coach, right? I mean, yeah.
Sure, it's a mixture. And quarterback is the one position. Clearly, this is obvious. Is that it's so connected to system and coach that if he goes in the wrong spot, like Lamar Jackson, we could argue that if he was put in another position or another team, might not be having the same success as, let's say, what he's doing right now with the Baltimore Ravens. So yes, that being said, though, Nick Foles was just in the right place at the right time with Philadelphia, because that defense was absolutely amazing that year. And yes, he did turn over the ball. Yes, he didn't make mistakes. Yes, he played well. But if you're Nick Foles, you're happy about that contract. But if you're a Jaguars fan, you're really not, because now what you have to do, if you're other teams right now looking for a quarterback, if you're going to move on from if you're Jacksonville, you're going to move on from Nick Foles, where is he going to go? Because you have two options, right? You either take one of these aging quarterbacks. You have Teddy Bridgewater, you have Cam Newton, you have Nick Foles, and these guys who are on these contracts. And actually, Cam Newton is probably one of the cheaper options of those guys mentioned. Or you go in the draft. Nick Foles is not someone that a lot of teams are going to pay a ton for in terms of draft capital. So that really scares you if you're a Jacksonville fan, because what you're potentially getting back and what you had to give up to get this guy, when you have someone now who's going to be on a rookie contract in Gardner Minshew, that's scary. That scares me, because I don't see any teams out there that would need a Nick Foles type quarterback, or what he brings, what like a Cam Newton doesn't bring to that table, for a much, much cheaper contract. So you're going to have to potentially move on from him, or you're going to have to sit on that contract and watch Gardner Minshew play on a cheaper contract.
Good stuff, guys. Lots more to come on the sweat. But first, how about some hot take tiers with Nate Burleson?
I am, I have YouTube. I see your rap videos all over the place here. So let's play Hot Take Tiers. So we're going to use our DraftKings Tiers format to construct your dream team of people to collaborate on a rap song, okay?
All right.
Tier 1 is the producers. We got Timbaland, we got Kanye West, DJ Khaled, or Dr. Dre.
Listen, I love me some Timberland. DJ Khaled, he might be screaming a little too much over my record, so I'm going with Dr. Dre as my producer.
Ooh, and I love anytime kind of he collabs with Eminem. That just kind of reminds me of my high school days, dude.
Hey, I feel you on that.
All right, Tier 2, Legends, Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, Jay-Z, or Snoop.
Damn.
I know, good luck with this one.
I feel like Kenan Thompson in that Saturday Night Live skit when he's looking at those answers. Like,
he's like, what? Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go with Jay-Z.
Tier 3, lyrically gifted here. So you have Nas, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, or Lil Wayne.
The most relatable content is J. Cole. I feel like J. Cole, he'll tell you himself, he went platinum with no features, so I'm going with J. Cole.
Okay, let's go to Tier 4. These are guys ruling the radio. So Drake, Post Malone, Travis Scott, or Lil Nas X.
All right, Lil Nas X just got here, so he's not even in the house of hip hop yet. Post Malone, he be having that subtle flow, even though White Iverson is my jam.
Yep.
I'm going with Drake. Drake can't lose.
Ladies only, Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, Missy Elliott, or Lil Kim.
I think for a woman that changed the game is Missy Elliott.
Yes.
Because she didn't come in with like the ladylike figure, you know what I'm saying? She just was very brash, and that video of her with the trash bag in the rain, like, I'm going with Missy Elliott.
Hot take tiers, man. You just built yourself the dream team, Nate. Well done, dude.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you. Hey, we got a collab though, man. I hear you musically gifted.
I used to play the saxophone in 5th grade. Yeah.
Okay, I can use a little Kenny G on my remix. You know what I'm saying?
I am in a group chat with 2 other guys, and we do kind of send those voice memos of rap lyrics every once in a while. We kind of switch it up and make it our own.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, I'll send you one after the show.
Welcome back to The Sweat. It's time to turn our attention to the association. DraftKings contributor Gary Thorne is here for NBA high or low. Quite simply, are these totals and spreads from tonight's action too high or too low? Pretty self-explanatory. Utah and Philadelphia have the lowest total on the slate tonight at 208.5. The 76ers are coming off a 119-point outing against the Pacers, and the Jazz just let up 130 to the Raptors. Quick maths, is this total too low, Garion? Nope, can't hear you. And nope, still can't hear you.
I think I'm back now.
Yeah, there he is.
My screen is telling me I'm back.
We're back.
Look, I think on the surface, I can understand why people might be trending towards the over here. And look, the Jazz's defense has been terrible the last 6 games. It's no coincidence that in that span, a span where they've had the 7th worst defensive rating in basketball, the over is hit in 5 of those 6 games. But, I look at this Philadelphia team and I'm just so uninspired by their offense. They really do play a 90s style of basketball, which we probably could have guessed was going to happen when you put 7 centers on the same team, but they don't take a lot of 3-pointers. They're not a very efficient offense. And tonight, without Josh Richardson, who arguably has been, not just their best perimeter offensive creator, but maybe one of the best offensive creators on that team, they've been scoring 5.5 points per 100 possessions fewer with Richardson off the court. I think what they want to do on offense with Joel Embiid and with him being in the 85th percentile in post-ups leans directly into what the strongest point of Utah's defense is, which is Rudy Gobert's rim protection and post-up defense. So I actually think this game is too high. I like the under here.
All right, how about the highest total on the slate? Phoenix and Charlotte with 224. The Hornets have only averaged 101 points over their last 4 games. So it could take a lot of work from the Suns to get to the over. So is it too high or too low here?
I think it's too low. You are correct. There are definitely concerns about Charlotte's offensive output here, but my goodness, is Charlotte's defense so generous to opposing offenses. Across the last 10 games, the Hornets have the lowest defensive rating in all of basketball, allowing almost 120 points per 100 possessions. They are a low-pace team, which does help out the overall numbers, the surface numbers a little bit, but they're horrendous on that side of the basketball. And just the personnel that the Suns are going to have tonight really does lean towards an offensive-oriented game and less so a defensive-oriented game. You're losing Aaron Baines, who is obviously one of the better interior defenders we have in the NBA and has really turned around that defense since he got a major role in Phoenix. And Ricky Rubio's back at full speed. Missed 5 games the last couple weeks. This will be his 3rd game back from injury. And that team is scoring almost 5 points more per 100 possessions when Rubio's on the court and kind of acting as that facilitator next to Devin Booker. So I think there's a lot of things trending in the direction of this hitting the over. And 10 of the last 12 Suns games have done that. So who am I to go against an overwhelming trend like that?
All right, Grizzlies are 10-point underdogs in their 2nd game of a back-to-back against the Pacers. Memphis picked up the win last night over the Timberwolves. So do you think this spread is a little too high? Maybe Memphis is going to be tired tonight?
I don't know. I would even say it's too low. I know 10 points as a home dog seems like a lot, and I can understand why people might be enticed to get on the Grizzlies train here, but there's just so many question marks about who can score, who can initiate scoring sequences for the Grizzlies. No John Morant, no Brandon Clark, who's been one of their 5 best players this season. They're missing Kyle Anderson. Jonas Valanciunas is questionable after missing last night's game. Is Jay Crowder going to drop 35 points? Because that's what they're going to need to stay in this game. And the thing, too, when you just look at what the Pacers do offensively and sort of the pieces they have, I don't trust Jaren Jackson to not get into foul trouble which is something he does on a regular basis anyway, let alone when he's going to have to be covering Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis. So I just don't know how they score. And I think people are kind of sleeping on the Pacers. People have been sleeping on the Pacers for like half a decade now. They're just a really solid team, especially in the regular season. They're very deep. The last 15 games, they're 11-4. They have the 5th best net rating in all of basketball. I know, again, it's a lot of points for a home dog, and there's probably a lot of value in betting that, but I'm going to take the Pacers here.
The Bucks are 16-point favorites over the Knicks tonight. The Knicks just played yesterday, and they lost to Boston, as we know. Milwaukee has won 11 in a row. So are the Bucks just going to roll here? Is the spread actually too low?
I don't know. This one's tough. I'll say right off the top, I hate betting 16-point lines in basketball. It just feels like fool's gold. And really, the numbers bear that out this season for the Bucks. This is a team that is 17-3 overall, but just 9-11 against the spread. They've won 11 straight, yet in their last 10 games, they only have 4 spread wins. So this is a team that gets a lot of respect from the books and is having a hard time covering these lines. And obviously the Knicks are terrible, but at the same time, they've been kind of competitive, at least in some of these losses. You look at their last 6 losses. They're on a 6-game losing streak coming into tonight. 5 of those losses have been by less than 10 points and against some pretty good teams. You mentioned that loss to Boston by 9 points last night. They've lost the 76ers twice by less than 10 points. I don't know. I'm going to side with the Knicks here. I'm not loving the fact that, Morris isn't playing tonight. He's arguably the Knicks' best player, which is a hilarious statement and a sad statement. But I guess just give me the points here.
Thanks, Gary, and I'll be right back to talk hockey with Jeff Ulrich. But first, here's Pat Mayo.
Hey, it's Brendan Glasheen here with the DraftKings Fantasy Flash. Baker Mayfield may have to start shaving that mustache lefty. That's because his right hand is wrapped up after injuring it Sunday against the Steelers. Baker's hand landed on the face mask of Pittsburgh linebacker Bud Dupree. Baker got removed in the first quarter, had x-rays at halftime, which came back negative. That's a good sign. Then he went back in on the Browns' first possession of the second half wearing a protective glove. While he did mention his hand was numb, Baker said the glove and the pain didn't at all affect him. Freddie Kitchens shared the same sentiment. I think Baker's fine, Kitchens said. He also called the injury a contusion and bruise. All right, so maybe he doesn't have to shave lefty. Certainly, he could make some throws with the right hand. Mayfield plans to play next week at home against Cincinnati, though the hand will be closely monitored during this week's preparation for Week 14. It's a must-win mindset the rest of the way for the Browns. 5-7 record. They're on the outside looking in. They've got a sniff. Bengals twice, Cardinals once, and then the Ravens. That'll be tough. No funny business in those commercial shoots, Baker.
Jeff Ulrich is here. Jeff, need you to take off your football hat and put on your hockey hat. We're talking hockey. Okay, Jack Eichel's the most expensive skater tonight. Are you paying up for him at $8,200?
Yeah, look, it's such a short slate, and Jack Eichel is basically producing it. He's really taken a step.
Oh,
can you hear me?
But now I can. There we go.
Okay, sorry. Could you hear me before? Anyways,
Start over.
Eichel, obviously, on the short slate, $8,200. You kind of have to make a decision. Eichel's going to be one of the most highly owned players on the slate, if not the most highly owned. So if you're not going with him, you're probably going to go down to like a devil stack with Taylor Hall or Patrick Kane. And the thing is, the Devils are obviously have a pretty good matchup too. The Buffalo Sabres have the 3rd worst penalty kill in the league, but Eichel is head and shoulders above, definitely upside-wise. Obviously, one of the top shooters in the league. Has already had a couple massive games in his last 10 games. So on this slate, just eating it. Obviously, if you're making a cash game lineup, definitely want to get exposure. New Jersey is bottom 10 in terms of penalty kills and goals against. So the matchup isn't even a concern. But and from a GPP perspective, just from the ownership, you can fade them. Cash games, you got to lock them.
You wrote about Nikita Gusev today as one of your favorite value plays. He's averaging only 7.5 DK fantasy points per game this season. So what do you like about him tonight?
Yeah, I mentioned the matchup. Buffalo definitely isn't a bad team to have your opponents going against. They have the 3rd worst penalty kill in the league. And this should be, there's so many bad teams on the slate tonight that you could see multiple offenses that generally aren't that good, and the Devils aren't a good offense, go off. So Gusev is kind of a cheap way to get exposure to the Devils. He's definitely played better of late, played 19 minutes his last time out, which I believe was a season high. But this is a very skilled player from the KHL, obviously. That's why the Devils brought him in. He's still getting a ton of first-line power play exposure, which you love in this spot. And again, he's so cheap at $4K that if you're scared of paying up for Taylor Hall, who's $8,200, and then pairing him, I mean, going with Gusev, who's going to get power play exposure. He's been on a very productive line with Coleman and Zajac lately, which has really improved. I like it. I mean, I like getting cheap exposure to this offense, and Gusev is definitely the easy way to do that.
All right, on defense, Cam Fowler of the Ducks has points in 4 of his last 5 games and is averaging over 13 DK fantasy points in that span. At 4,400, do you like him tonight against the Kings?
Yeah, I think you have to take a look at a guy like Cam Fowler. I mean, again, you probably are going to want to fit at least one of Kane or Eichel in your lineup tonight. If not, try and squeeze both in, which might be a little difficult, but you could probably do it. And if you're going to do that, you're not really going to be able to take any of the expensive defensemen. I'm not sure you need to take the highest defenseman on this slate because there's really none of the elite studs here. So, I mean, Cam Fowler is definitely productive, a couple 2.5 shots per game around there anyways. Definitely a player capable of hitting the shots on goal bonus. Not the greatest in terms of block shot production, but this is a player who plays a lot on the power play again. So the upside is certainly there with Fowler. He's got a terrific matchup too, going up against the Kings, who, again, just one of the most terrible teams in the league right now. Defensively, penalty kill. This is the team you obviously want a guy like Cam Fowler going up against. This is a team where, you know, if you're going to see a big upside night from Cam Fowler, you're probably going to see it against the Kings. So I like Cam Fowler. I also like Colton Parayko at 4,700. Again, going with multiple cheaper defensemen, definitely something to think about on this slate because then it's going to let you fit in Eichel and possibly a couple other stacks or something like that. So Fowler definitely in play. The matchup definitely dictates it, and the fact there's no elite defenseman.
All right, Henrik Lundqvist has been solid at home this season, 6-2-1. He gets the Golden Knights tonight at MSG. Do you like him at his $7,300 price tag?
Yeah, I mean, this is a night, again, I mentioned there's a ton of terrible teams on the slate, and like goalie-wise, it's just kind of a nightmare. I mean, you can eat the safe chalk with Varlamov and the Islanders, I guess, but I mean, he's going to be heavily owned. So especially in GPPs, you should be looking elsewhere because the DK shots on goal bonus dictates that, I mean, one of these bad goalies on these bad teams is probably going to stop a lot of shots and have a good night and get the win and possibly approach the shots on goal bonus. The Rangers let the most shots on goal per game in the league. So the second most, Chicago lets the most. So that's a good thing right off the top. Henrik Lundqvist hasn't played that well this year, but definitely in his spot here. The Rangers have also played well over the last 4 or 5 games, some big wins. So Vegas, not the most intimidating opponent right now. I would probably rather lean towards going with Malcolm Subban over Henrik Lundqvist just because I feel like Subban is a much better goalie at this point in his career. But really, all options are on the table for goalie tonight. I think Lundqvist, if you do like the Rangers at home, certainly in play, definitely going to see a lot of shots because the Rangers always allow a lot of shots. So GPP-wise, definitely if you need a value option, Lundqvist is fine.
All right, slated for pick time. Who is your lock for tonight's slate?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Patrick Kane. This is just a player, 16 points over his last 10 games. I know it's the St. Louis Blues. And it's not the greatest matchup, but Patrick Kane's playing 22 minutes a night. He's a lot cheaper than Jack Eichel, and I especially think for GPPs, you might get him at a lot lower ownership than I think you realize. So I'm going to go with Patrick Kane and just say that he keeps the roll going tonight.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Grab your football hat. You're back with Reed in a couple minutes to take a look at some Monday Night Football bets right after the latest from the Pat Mayo Experience.
Monday Night Football. The spread in this game, Minnesota at the Seattle Seahawks. It opened at 3. It is now down to -2.5 for the Seahawks at home. As pointed out a little bit earlier, that the Vikings have been abysmal against the spread outdoors against teams with winning records. I believe they're now 1-18 in their past 19 games against the spread. So that instantly puts me on the Seahawks here. Although I would really want Minnesota to win just to shake up the NFC playoff picture a little bit. The over-under is 49 in this game. Do you have a particular lean in this game? Because Seahawks -2.5 feels like a pretty good bet to me. And then we'll talk about player props afterwards.
Yeah, I lean to the Seahawks side of it. And then I have a bet placed right now on the over for 49.5 right now in this game. Both secondaries are a little bit shaky. Minnesota has a pass rush, which is good. Seattle right now doesn't. And they have injuries to their offensive line. So I think you're just going to have opportunities, even without Thielen, for Minnesota, where there's just going to be a lot of passing and a lot of success passing against the outside corners of Minnesota. And then without a doubt, the outside corners for Seattle. And really, even in the slot, there'll be a nice matchup.
The big thing here is that if Cousins continues to perform outdoors like he has done against even like reasonable defenses, that without Thielen, only Diggs, you have BC Johnson stepping up, and then the two-headed monster of Kyle Rudolph and Big Irv Smith. I think like under completions for Cousins might end up being the play. He can complete a few long ones, potentially. I actually would lean under in this game versus over, now that you think about it.
Yeah. I think I see the issues there, and honestly, like betting any sort of upside, and that's what you're doing with the over here, and Kirk Cousins outdoors is an issue. But I think that the way this offense is set up is nice. The main concern that this offense runs into, and the one prop bet that I like, it kind of hedges it maybe a little bit, but like with no Thielen, they just run so many two tight end sets that Busy Johnson is naturally a slot receiver, but he's playing on the outside. They don't run that many 3 wide receiver sets, but when you do, you're going to put Laquan Treadwell on the field. That's a really bad receiving core, and you'll have probably Treadwell and Busy for most of the game going up against Shaq Griffin. So that side of the field might just become a wasteland. The upside you have, though, is Cook out of the backfield has been well. Both tight ends have been playing well. And then you have Diggs, who is just an explosive player on the outside. So I think I lean over still.
I would think that the way to play this, like I said, Seattle minus 2.5 would be my preferred play, but I think I would look towards some of the Dalvin Cook props potentially, like over under 40.5 receiving yards. It's 4.5 catches for his over. I don't necessarily like that. It's pretty high, but he could turn. It was almost like the Jameis prop on Sunday where it was 15.5. Like that's one run from Jameis. Like if he actually gets out into open space, he's going to cover that all in one run, and that's what ended up happening. I feel the same way about this Dalvin Cook receiving prop. He might only end up with like 3 catches, but if they get him in space, he can just go. Like he's so explosive.
Yeah, he's explosive in open space. It's always like that. You can have just one big play and it makes up for the entire day of the bet, so it's safer. But yeah, I think Cooks seems okay there. Like if I'm somebody like myself betting the over, like those overs just naturally seem better. The one prop that I liked was Diggs, 77.5, I think it was, receiving yards as an over, and it just really correlates with like the entire game going over to an extent. If he has a big game, there's a better chance that this game's going to the 50-point spot, and if not, it at least hedges against it. So with Diggs, Shaq Griffin and Trey Flowers, the outside cornerbacks for Seattle, they stay on each side of the field. They don't move. So it's just very easy to get Diggs in the better matchup against Flowers, which is a very positive matchup for him. And since Shaq Griffin is not a shadow or anything like that, he'll just have a favorable matchup for most of that game.
I'm back, you're back, these two are back. DraftKings contributors Reed Fowler and Jeff Ulrich. Gentlemen, we're chasing or fading the following bets for Monday Night Football. So chase or fade. Seahawks covering at home, Reed.
I like that. It's very, very exciting transition there. And I think they do. I think they do cover at home. Look, Minnesota is a strong defense, but look at Seattle, especially with playing at home. Like they don't cover very well at home. They're 1-4. Currently this season with an ATS close to, a margin of that around a field goal. But if you take a look at this offense and hopefully trusting Chris Carson with the ball, maybe that works, maybe that doesn't. But this defense, and especially this offense, this passing offense, which is very, very good, very elite, I think that's where you really have to exploit the Minnesota Vikings defense. That secondary hasn't been what we're used to. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But yes, I do think Seattle covers.
Jeff, what do you think?
I'm going to go with Seattle, too. I kind of like Minnesota at the start of the week, but, their secondary is not good. And again, I just do not like betting against elite quarterbacks, and Russell Wilson is the most elite quarterback in the league right now, in my opinion. Second most, whatever, I don't care. We won't get into that conversation, but he's top 3, right? So you have that factor. You have Seattle at home, and then the big factor for me is Kirk Cousins against good teams outside is basically just turns into nothing. I mean, his only wins have come against the Giants and the Jets since he's been with the Vikings. So that's a real concern, especially without Adam Thielen in this game. I mean, if Russell Wilson is able to get ahead through the air, I really, really have doubts that Kirk Cousins and the Vikings without Adam Thielen are going to be able to come back and even keep this within 3. So I think at 2.5, I'm definitely leaning towards the Seattle Seahawks. I know they haven't been the greatest cover team at home. I think it's a good point, but I think this matchup favors them. I think with Josh Gordon back there too, DK Metcalf, I think that Minnesota Vikings secondary might get torched tonight.
Okay, fairly high total at 49. Jeff, chase or fade, this game hits the over.
Yeah, I mean, if I like Wilson and his receivers to go off in the spot, I got to chase the over too. I think the Vikings, especially with Steph Diggs, in a decent matchup and the way they've worked in Irv Smith, I think they have enough firepower too. So that if Seattle does get ahead, like I think they might, that Minnesota will at least be able to put up some points here, get to 20, 21 and push us towards the over. There's a little bit of a talk about like flu running through Seattle's locker room, but I don't think it's going to be a big factor. Seattle's coming in healthy. Again, I just love the matchup with Russell Wilson against a Vikings secondary. It's very overrated. I do think this one will hit the over.
Reed, is it going to hit the over?
Yeah, I think so as well. Over is Minnesota 5-1 in the last 6 games overall. And if you just look at their last 3 away games, Minnesota has hit the over. So when they have to score a ton, which again, I think that they have to in this matchup, especially talking about that secondary in Minnesota, I think they're going to have to score a bunch. So yeah, I agree with Jeff here. Over.
All right, Tyler Lockett coming off a disappointing game against Philadelphia last week. 1 measly catch for 38 yards. Reed, his reception total is set at 4.5 for this one. Chase or fade, he stays under that total.
I'm going to fade that he stays under. I think he goes over this. And we've seen Tyler Lockett be extremely efficient, and he has really been a boom bust again this year. More on the boom. We've seen huge games from Tyler Lockett. Again, what you like about Tyler Lockett is his matchup. Alexander, the guy on the other side who should be shadowing, or not shadowing, should be on him for the most part of the game. It hasn't been great, hasn't been bad. He's only given up, I think, 1 game over 4 receptions. I think it was 6 against Detroit. But again, Seattle exploiting this part of Minnesota's defense is going to be their game plan. I think over.
Jeff, over?
Yeah, I'm going to take the over here too. Again, I just like the matchup. I just don't think that there's anyone on the Vikings secondary that's really going to match up that well with Tyler Lockett. I mean, it's a team that's basically bottom 10 in most defensive categories against the wide receiver, receptions, yards, you name it. I mean, they just haven't been good. Xavier Rhodes putting up kind of a career worst year, and Rhodes probably won't really be on Lockett that much, but if he ever did, I mean, that would be a matchup worth exploiting. So this is a team that gave up 6 receptions to Randall Cobb, who plays a little bit of a similar role a couple weeks ago. I think Lockett is definitely due for a bounce back. Obviously, he was dealing with a bit of a thigh contusion, but I mean, the extra week and time, I think Lockett will definitely put up 5 or more catches here.
No Adam Thielen once again for the Vikings offense. He'll miss the game with his nagging hamstring injury. 1 less weapon for Kirk Cousins, whose passing yardage total is set at 260.5. Jeff, despite no Thielen last week, Cousins put up 319 yards in a win over Denver. So chase or fade, he can go over the 260.5 total.
Yeah. This one's a little scary because I mentioned the outdoors factor, right? And I mean, you have to take into consideration that game against Denver, just a good passing defense, but I mean, it was in the Dome in Minnesota. So, I mean, you get a better matchup here against Seattle, but it's not the greatest matchup in the world, but he's outside, right? So the one thing that I think is in Cousins' favor of hitting over is the fact that I do think Seattle's going to be able to put up points, and that'll just force them into more of a volume role later in this game. So I'm going to lean to, I'm still going to say under here. I just don't trust Kirk Cousins enough, even in a catch-up role, to be confident enough to take the over at 260. I think it was lower, like 240, 245. I'd probably go. But this is just a player who, when he hits outdoors against decent teams, is just not performed. He's missing Adam Thielen. It's not really a prop I like, as you can probably guess by now. But and if I was forced to choose, I'd take the under.
Really doesn't like that one. Reed, what do you think?
No, I share that fear with Kirk Cousins there. And if you just look, right, they're not passing it a ton. Excuse me. Excuse me. But again, that's what Kirk Cousins does to you, right? Like he makes this happen. But look, if you look at the games that he has thrown over 260 yards, some big games. So look, in that Denver game, he did it in the second half. So he had to catch up, and that's what we think is going to happen in the Seattle game. I think that's more of what we're going to see this game, is that they're going to have to play catch-up. And Stephon Diggs, in those games that Kirk Cousins has gone over 300 or 260 yards, he's had monster games. And that match with Trey Flowers is very exploitable. They're going to be playing a catch-up role. I get that it scares you because they run the ball so much, and Kirk Cousins doesn't do that well, but I'm still going with the over here.
You guys...
Yeah, and I think one thing we both agree on,
Jeff?
rather than take the Kirk Cousins prop, go with the over Steph Diggs prop. I like that way more.
All right, you tell him, Jeff. All right, you guys stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, Tara Lenizak in with your DK Fantasy Flash. One of the best relievers in baseball might be available this winter. Ken Rosenthal at The Athletic reports that the Milwaukee Brewers are listening to offers on 25-year-old Josh Hader. When Rosenthal asked Brewers GM David Stearns about it, Stearns didn't exactly deny the report, saying, "We listen on a wide variety of players throughout the offseason." Hader will carry a hefty price tag with him in arbitration, and Milwaukee might not be able to swing it. So moving on now could get them their biggest return. Since making his MLB debut in 2017, Hader has a 2.42 ERA and has struck out an unreal 349 batters in just 204 2/3 innings. So, which MLB teams are in need of an all-star in their bullpen? Rosenthal says the Mets could have an interest and would be willing to move pieces off their roster to lock down a deal for the Southpaw. We'll have to see how this one plays out in the upcoming months. One last go around with our basketball guru, Gary and Thorne. Gary, let's shut it down with some pick and roll. So are you going to pay up for an expensive option or roll to someone cheaper? Giannis is naturally the most expensive player on this slate. By a lot, $12,000 to roster. The Greek Freak tonight against the Knicks. Are you paying that or rolling to someone cheaper to help your lineups at the forward position?
I think you have to roll here. And I'm saying that knowing full well there are a lot of sort of semi-obvious value plays on this slate. Like you can get Dennis Smith Jr. into a lineup for 3-2. We'll talk about Robin Lopez in a second. There are ways to make the 12K work. And obviously Giannis's ceiling is unlike any ceiling you can find on a given slate. But the problem is really just the apathy of the Milwaukee Bucks. They win games so handily and so casually so often. Giannis doesn't have to play that many minutes. We saw this against Charlotte. He played 20 minutes. 20. And it was the first time this season he didn't get a double-double. He almost did. That's pretty impressive in 20 minutes. But 6 of his last 9 games, he hasn't reached 60 DraftKings points. And that sounds crazy because he hits 55 in most of them, but you have to grade this guy on a curve. And if he's not going to bring back 5x value at a consistent basis, I think you can just go elsewhere. Like you look at Ben Simmons at $8,300. Simmons has been fantastic from a DFS perspective when Josh Richardson does not play because Simmons becomes the primary ball handler and really the only ball handler in that 76ers starting lineup. His assist rate goes from like 28% to 40%, and that's why we've seen him dish out 13 assists in 3 of these 4 games where Richardson has been sitting out. So I would just rather play Ben Simmons for $4,000 less, even though the Greek Freak is always going to be a very good play.
Well, you just mentioned Ben Simmons, but Trae Young is the most expensive point guard, 10-5 on tonight's slate. So you kind of maybe already answered my question. Do you like Young, or can you get similar production tonight from someone cheaper like Ben Simmons? He's $8,300.
Well, I don't think you have to choose, and that's the thing. If you don't put Giannis in your lineup, you can have both these guys, and that's really the direction I would rather go. I just think this game between Atlanta and Golden State, I know the projected total is not quite as high as that Phoenix-Charlotte game, but I have a lot more confidence that this game is going to hit the over. There's just no level of defense between these two rosters. Like, nothing. Draymond Green's not playing? Cool. No one can play defense on these two teams. This game is going to hit the over. I would be almost shocked if it doesn't get over 230, 235 points. Golden State's got the worst defensive rating in the Western Conference. And the great thing is, unlike Atlanta's last game where, Trae Young and the Hawks were just so bad that he didn't have to play all that many minutes in the second half because things got out of hand, these are the teams with the 2 lowest net ratings in basketball. I think it'll be competitive from the sense that they're just both bad teams. And if Trae Young is going to play 35-plus minutes, this is a pretty fair price for him. His last 5 games, he's got a usage rate above 37%, a true shooting percentage above 66%, and he's averaging 1.5 DraftKings points per minute. So I think you can use both of these players.
Let's take a look at a couple of guards. Zach LaVine is $7,900 at Sacramento. He's averaging just under 50 fantasy points over his last 4 games. On the other side of this game is Buddy Hield. He's a little cheaper and just as hot, 47.5 points last time against Portland and 58.75 against Golden State before that. So who do you like here?
I don't really love either of these guys. I think
Fair.
If I had to choose between the two, I would probably just take the cheaper option in Hield, who's been giving you a similar level of production in recent games. He's not been nearly as consistent as LaVine, and that's because LaVine just has a bit more of a skill set conducive to being a lead guard. Hield is kind of a secondary option, someone who's a catch-and-shoot type player in the best possible scenario. But look, I just don't think Sacramento's a great team to pick on. First and foremost, LaVine is a streaky player. And, while we know he's going to take 20 plus shots in this game, he might hit 6 of them. Like he is not the most consistent DFS asset in the world. And you look at the way Sacramento has implemented their attack the past 10 games, they have a top 10 defensive rating in basketball across that span of time. They also have the slowest pace in the league. Pace is really the be all end all here. And it's just not a game that I'm looking to attack heavily. Like there's so much flexibility with these roster positions at this point. If you can just find a way to get like Kelly Oubre Jr. in there for 7,000, I think he's a better play than both these guys.
Domantas Sabonis is only behind Joel Embiid for the highest priced center tonight. He's going to cost you $8,000 against the Knicks, but would you consider saving some big money and going to Robin Lopez? You mentioned him earlier. He's $4,400, and he's going to be stepping into the starting lineup for the Bucks with his brother Brook out with back soreness.
Yeah, I think Lopez is a pretty safe way to go here. I don't think he's going to play 30 minutes tonight. You might be looking at someone who only plays 20 to 25 minutes, but he was productive in his last start. The Knicks are a pretty good rebounding team, but their interior defense is relatively soft, especially when Mitchell Robinson is not on the court or he's in foul trouble. So I think Lopez is a pretty good play at center. And if you're looking at, Sabonis as a power forward option, I don't know. I mean, the thing with Sabonis, I don't want to take anything away from the guy, but he's only actually hit 50 DraftKings points twice this season. And he's only actually hit 5x value once. The last 3 times his salary has been over $8,000 with Miles Turner also active. I think Sabonis is the definition of a cash game player. He will get you 15 and 12 night after night, but he's just not going to bring that ceiling where, I think if you're looking at power forward, Jay Crowder at $5,400. I kind of mentioned this last segment, but there is nobody active for Memphis tonight. You kind of have to get somebody in there. And while Jaren Jackson Jr. is maybe the sexier play, Jay Crowder's just going to be on the court. And Jaren Jackson's had so much trouble with fouls this season that I think I trust him a little bit more. So cash games, sure, Sabonis is an option, but I just don't think he's a GPP option right now.
All right, Slate Approved pick time. Who you going with, Garion?
I think it's Trae Young. I'm blown away by how well he's been playing at the incredible volume he's been playing at too the past 5 games. That game is going to have a lot of points. Again, no one can play defense. That helps.
That does help. Thank you, Gary, and you're free to go. I'll be right back with Reed and Jeff to get their Monday Night Showdown picks. In the meantime, here is our pal, Pat Mayo.
DraftKings Showdown for the Monday night game. In the captain spot, you can go to Dalvin Cook if you like. And if that's the case, you have to spend $17,700 on him as your captain. Only $11,800 as a flex player. The next highest guys are Wilson, Diggs, Lockett, Cousins, Carson, Metcalf. That's probably where you would want to be for your captain spot. Can you imagine using anyone who's not one of those top 7 guys as your captain this week? Maybe Hollister?
I was about to say Hollister. Hollister's like the only one, and really it's just because of the 2 touchdown upside. We saw it a couple weeks back, and he's just running a ton of routes, being used in the red zone heavily, like you saw earlier in this year out of Will Dissly. So they use tight ends well in the offense. He's like the only one, though. There's just a huge drop off. Like you have the high priced guys, and then it just drops like the 4K range right away. So Hollister at 4,800 as like an outside guy banking on 2 touchdowns. But for me, for captains right now, I'm looking primarily at Stephon Diggs and then DK Metcalf.
Really? So you wouldn't spend up on the Dalvin Cook? Is it just because you don't like who the cheaper options are on the slate?
So I think the one issue that I had, and I haven't built too much here, but just like messing around with it a little bit. I think, well, first, Seattle's strongest on the ground. They've gotten worse over the last couple of weeks, still ranked right now 10th. Cook's volume is fine, but the one issue when it comes to just player pricing, I really like Diggs on this slate, and you have Cook at 11,800. So if you're building one lineup, if you want to play Cook and Diggs, it could still work, but then you're just forfeiting playing probably any of Lockett or one of those quarterbacks. So both quarterbacks being up there at 9K plus, it leads me to a spot where I'd rather play Diggs and either Cousins or get Wilson in there above getting Cook in there over one of those quarterbacks just to correlate it with Diggs.
Like, does that mean you would probably have to go to someone like BC Johnson or even Irv Smith if you had to?
Yeah, so I like Irv Smith. And the thing with Irv Smith is he's priced below kickers, which is fine. Like he's averaging over the last 6 weeks of the year, 8 fantasy points per game. He gets right on 3 catches for like 30 yards a game. And the weird thing is he's $3,000 less than Kyle Rudolph. He's playing the exact same role, similar snaps to Rudolph this year, and especially the last month of the year. So he's like the same player as Rudolph, used just as much in the red zone, but he's $3,000 less. So I think you're pretty much getting a kicker in terms of how consistent he's been, with the upside of if he scores a touchdown, he's much better than that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like, would you use someone like Jason Myers as your captain? Do you ever use kickers as your captain?
No, I know it worked. What week did it work this year? The guy had like 30 points in the kicker spot.
Yeah, I forget. Like, I actually think the move might be to use Kirk Cousins as your captain and just pray Minnesota gets their together for this game.
No, yeah, quarterbacks in the captain spot are just way under-owned for how much they actually work out. Matt Ryan was the winning captain on Thanksgiving. They'll work out like 1 out of every 6 slates, but people won't play them anywhere near that often. So, yeah, so like when I said it, I'm not going to probably get to as much Cook in the captain spot. I'll definitely have him in utility spots, but yeah, Cousins makes sense, and just more so he makes sense salary-wise at $9,000 when you have Russell Wilson pushing $2,000 more, and at that point, it's still a fine matchup, but how much meat do you have left on the bone in your salary? It gets a little bit more difficult if you want to captain Wilson.
The only one that I'll throw out there that's a little bit different is BC Johnson. That if we expect this game, you say like, oh, you can get Diggs onto his preferred matchup against the Seattle secondary, but maybe Diggs has a preferred side, and that's the bad matchup. That when they get in the red zone, BC Johnson is still running a lot of these Adam Thielen routes that we've seen, and that leads to touchdowns. That you could possibly spike a 2-touchdown game from BC Johnson. He's not super expensive. If you did put him in as your captain, you could probably have Cousins and Wilson and Cook if you wanted to.
Final block of the show means DraftKings contributors Reed Fowler and Jeff Ulrich are back to give me their Monday Night Football showdown picks. Seahawks, Vikings. Who's your captain, Reed?
It's going to be Dalvin Cook. I mean, this guy, I know he's the most expensive. I know he's 17-7. It's a lot of money that you got to pay up for this guy, but he is an absolute monster when it comes to just his production and yards from the line of scrimmage, whether it be passing, whether it be rushing. And that's the main key for me and why I'm paying up, because if you look at Seattle's defense against Alvin Kamara, even David Johnson, Todd Gurley, guys of running backs past, Nick Chubb, these guys have all had productive games both on the ground and through the air. Seattle's defense can't stop a guy like Dalvin Cook. So pay out for Dalvin Cook at 17-7 and leave the rest to some other guys.
Jeff, your captain, please.
Dalvin Cook.
That's right.
Steph Diggs. Look, we've already talked about it. I mean, the Vikings are projected to be down in this game, and Steph Diggs is probably going up against Trey Flowers. It's a matchup I absolutely love. Look at some of the players that have gone up against the Seattle secondary, and Trey Flowers specifically. I mean, Julio Jones posted a massive game. I do not have the stats in front of me because I closed the page, but there are other players who have done it. Trust me, this is a really good matchup for Steph Diggs in all seriousness. And I do feel like Minnesota at some point in this game is going to have to really let it loose. I think this is a massive upside spot. And just looking at what Seattle does well, they do actually do pretty well against the run. They're a top 12 run defense, but they have the 4th worst adjusted sack rate. So even if I don't love Kirk Cousins' stats outdoors, this is a really good spot because there's not a ton of pass rush going to be involved. He's got a great matchup for his best receiver. I think Steph Diggs is in for a monster night.
Jeff, are you ready to tell me who you're stacking with Stephon Diggs, or do you need a minute?
You might need a minute to refresh those pages.
It's an easy one.
Okay.
It's Kirk Cousins. I mean, I'm not exactly sold on Kirk Cousins having maybe like the best statistical night, but from a fantasy perspective, I do think he's going to get there, and I do feel like both quarterbacks are probably going to be in the winning lineup tonight. So obviously, if I like Steph Diggs to go for like over 100 and a touchdown, then the quarterback is probably going to do pretty good too. And again, it really comes down to matchup. I think that Kirk Cousins, even being outdoors, which I know he's kind of turned into dust over times with the Vikings, I still think he's going to be able to take advantage of that. And he's also got nice matchups for his tight ends. So with no pass rush, I feel like even if Kirk Cousins does end up like turning the ball over a couple times, he's still going to get there. Maybe throw for 2, maybe even 3 touchdowns in like a garbage time thing. So give me Kirk Cousins and Steph Diggs as a combo tonight.
Reed, who are you stacking with Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, I just want to remind the viewers that Jeff said that he doesn't like Kirk Cousins for the prop for all the reasons why he's overtly said that he likes Kirk Cousins, the opposite reasons why he likes Kirk Cousins for the showdown. I get it. It's 2 different things, so I get that. But I'm going with Steph Diggs. You know, the reason why I like Steph Diggs as a stack and not my captain is, like, he's gone over 20 DK fantasy points in like 4 of the last 6, but we've seen his floor as well. In those other games, he's failed to like eclipse 10 DK fantasy points, and that scares me. He's not going to be extremely expensive in that captain spot, but I like him in that to pair him with, again, a Vikings running back in Dalvin Cook, because look, this team again they're going to have to produce offense, and those two guys, especially with Thielen out and Irv Smith being better and getting still a rookie tight end, those two guys are going to be leaned on heavily in this game. So I don't mind paying up again for Dalvin Cook. Let's stack him with Stephon Diggs, because he can absolutely go bonkers in this game.
All right, how about some value for the people, Reed?
Yeah, it's going to be Jacob Hollister, the tight end in Seattle. We've seen, like, the Vikings don't give up a ton of production, but they give up a ton of targets. I think they lead the league in, like, close to 10 targets per game given up to the opposing tight ends. And we've seen Hollister now, and especially a Seattle tight end, enter name here, do well in this offense. This is the #1 pass offense per DVOA, and now you get Jacob Hollister at $4,800. If it's not going to be a Gordon night, and if he still needs to get ramped up, even though he's been there now for about a month, if it's not going to be a DK Metcalf, who I also think is in a good spot, but he's a bit more expensive, Jacob Hollister, especially with how accurate Russell Wilson is, especially towards the red zone and the end zone, that's where he looks for either DK Metcalf or his tight end. I like Hollister.
Jeff, value, please.
I'm going to go to tight end on the other side. It's not Kyle Rudolph. It's going to be Irv Smith. I mean, this is a player at 3,600. I mean, just from a reception, just looking at his player card alone, I mean, he's averaging 4 receptions over his last 4 games. That's really good for 3,600. It's basically giving you like almost a kicker kind of floor every game, but this is a really solid matchup for him as well. He's playing 81% of the snaps. I mentioned Seattle against the tight end. It's not exactly the greatest position that they cover. So 3,600 for an explosive player. I mean, Irv Smith is essentially, he almost profiles a little bit like Evan Ingram. That he almost profiles more as a wide receiver. Maybe doesn't quite get as, he's splitting red zone looks with Rudolph. But again, just from a floor perspective at 3,600, I think it's great value there. I think just in general, too, this whole slate has a lot of potential big upside at players under 5K. I think Josh Gordon is really interesting, too. But for me, the one that definitely stands out is Irv Smith.
All right, but what about somebody who you're totally fading, Jeff? Somebody you want to stay away from?
Yeah, it's Chris Carson. I mean, I guess I'm back on the fade Chris Carson train, and we'll see if this Rashad Penny thing is just a facade or not. But when you stack up the two running backs side by side, I mean, Rashad Penny is a first-round draft pick. He's a guy who's just more explosive with the ball in open space, and I really feel like the Seahawks at some point will make this switch where Rashad Penny at least becomes like a 50% back. So I'm just not sure how you can trust Chris Carson in this game, in this spot at his price tag of 8,400 as a flex. If he fumbles the ball early or he just starts being a little bit ineffective and Penny comes in and busts like one long run or a screen pass for 20 yards, he's not going to get that much touch. He's not going to get that many more touches over the night because they will work Penny. And at least that is what the coach speak has been this week. And I do believe it'll happen. I think the matchup as well, I mean, against the solid D-line of Minnesota dictates that getting Penny in space would be smarter anyways. So I'm going to fade Chris Carson.
Reed, who are you fading?
Yeah, 2 for 2. Chris Carson, it's scary when you have a guy who's fumbled quite a bit. He was fumble-free for about a month and a half or 5 weeks or so, and you just can't secure the ball. And that, again, scares you because you really have to go off of to what Jeff was mentioning. Coaches talked that Carson is their guy. Schottenheimer came out earlier this week and said Chris Carson and our rotation is going to stay the same. Well, it would behoove them to not have it stay the same if Chris Carson can't produce. And they're close. They're in the hunt. They're 9-2. They're right there with these other teams in the NFC. So they have to keep on going. And it's not about showing trust in the guys, putting the best person out there. And if you can get this right with Rashad Penny, because, again, we could see Chris Carson. This is the same narrative that we saw when Carson was fumbling, that everyone went to the waiver wire to pick up Rashad Penny. Everyone was started like, Rashad Penny, it's his time. And then it didn't happen, right? They gave the bulk of the carries to Carson. That's the scary part because the correlations, you can't stack these guys together because when one's in, the other one's not playing. So you have to choose either or. Right now, Rashad Penny is a little bit more expensive, but a little too expensive, but Chris Carson, you just can't trust that guy to have the lion's share at his price tag. So yeah, I'm with Jeff here. Completely fade.
All right, guys, good work. That's a show. The Sweat is on Monday through Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. Tune in on the DraftKings Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. See you tomorrow at 6.